Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the video. I'm GetGoodGuy, and the patch notes are out for the upcoming January update for Battlefield 5, coming this week. It's set to drop on the 17th, and I have a breakdown of the key details for you today. I'll pick out the bits that I think are the most noteworthy, as there's around 8 pages of info, and I'm not going to just sit here and read that all to you, and I doubt that's what you want anyway. You probably want to hear the most important stuff. But if you do want to see all of the information, I'll link to the patch notes in the description. And so, let's get right into this. First off, the big stuff. Squad Conquest is a mode that will be introduced. It's essentially smaller Conquest with 16 players on each team, and those two teams have 2 squads each. There will be 3 flags, spawning will be restricted to just HQs, so it seems like there will be no squad spawning, and the mode will be available on Arras, Rotterdam and Hamada. This is DICE's attempt at a more tactical and closer range Conquest with less random elements. Hopefully it'll be good. We'll also see the return of the Rush game mode and a brand new Grand Operation. On top of this, we'll be able to get our hands on 3 new weapons from the Tides of War weekly challenges. The ZK383, which is an SMG, yes, finally a new SMG. The Model 1944, which I assume is a semi-auto rifle. The patch notes just label it as an SA, so I apologize if that's incorrect, but that's the only logical conclusion I can come to. And finally, the M1922, which is an MMG. And now let's get on to fixes and alterations. We'll begin this all off with time to death and death experience fixes. So the name of the enemy that killed a player is now shown in the game world when the player has died. This helps the person that died to recognize where they were killed from and how, which has been a big issue up to now. The camera will also zoom to and follow that enemy as well. In addition, there will also be improved accuracy of the visual representation of incoming bullets. Traces should now consistently appear from the shooter and should be clearer when the victim is directly looking at the shooter. This is another one I'm very happy about, as the game really doesn't give you enough feedback about enemy placement and damage direction in the current build. They have also fixed the UI directional damage indicators and have made it more accurate. So overall, you should have a better idea of where enemy damage is coming from now. I'll note that there isn't a mention of a netcode or overall time to death fix. Hopefully that will come not too long after this patch. Now we'll get to soldier fixes and tweaks. First off, there's vaulting, which now shouldn't trigger when jumping against steep hills and slopes. You now also shouldn't receive damage when vaulting over a wall or low object, and there will be improved vaulting detection when trying to vault through a window that's already broken. Thank God for that, because I'm tired of being shot in the back as I repeatedly bang my face against seemingly nothing. Now on to revives. They've fixed an issue where players would pick up a weapon while reviving on console. This is awesome news. Some of my friends will be absolutely rejoicing over this one, and they've improved the overall camera behavior when reviving a down player very quickly, as well as fixing an issue with clipping through the down soldier sometimes when reviving. Onwards to animations, and I make this very brief as they're not very impactful. Essentially, ragdolls have been improved in multiple ways and will be more affected by the impulse of explosions. Players will no longer get a strange arm pose when melee hitting an enemy 3 times in a row and then switching to the fortification tool, and they fixed an issue where the ammo self-supply animation could get stuck and play indefinitely. That's another one I'm pleased about, as I've had that happen multiple times myself. And then under miscellaneous, we have improved sliding activation consistency when double tapping by reducing the impact of turning while sprinting, and general improvements to auto peek and auto lean. Now let's go for vehicles. So half tracks now take more and more consistent damage, making them easier to destroy. All tank cannons will one-hit kill all types of airplanes regardless of specialization choices. All airplanes have their cannon ammunition raised from 150 rounds to 200. There's a balancing of vehicle machine guns, so German and British ones should now be of equal potency. There's a reduction to the damage resistance of prone players, so essentially it'll be harder to survive tank shells as infantry by just going prone. There's a reduction to the reload times of rockets and bombs for vehicles, and players should no longer fall under the map when spawning into a vehicle that managed to get destroyed right before the spawn. Now we'll get to weapons, gadgets, and specialization alterations. I'll be pretty selective here as there's a lot, but I'll mention the ones that I think are the most important. Again, as stated earlier, if you want to read everything, then use the link to the full patch notes in the description. So the M1907 SF will now have extended magazine equipped by default, meaning it won't be a specialization option, and it will instead have the option of recoil buffer. Basically, it got a buff. Its specializations will be reset and you will be refunded the CC for unlocking them. The M1928A1 got a nerf in the form of a decrease to the effectiveness of the ported barrel specialization. This is intended to bring it better in line with other SMGs. I really hope other SMG changes will make this okay, otherwise some people are going to be really mad, but big SMG changes will be talked about later on in this video, aside from what I'm about to mention. So they've fixed an issue where some weapons were inaccurate for too long when going from sprinting to firing when aiming down sight. SMGs should see the largest benefit from this change. This also applies to the slings and swivels and enhanced grip specializations, basically giving them a buff as well. Now the Panzerfaust is being rebalanced again. It now won't have a long delay before being able to fire when switching to it from another weapon. It will also always one-shot an airplane again, regardless of specialization selections. But it overall now has reduced damage. It should still be viable for taking down enemy tanks if used appropriately, but it won't be as easy. Onwards, the throwing knives will now have a max range of 10 meters, increased from 6.5, and the delay between throwing two consecutive knives has been reduced by 40%, so basically you can throw them faster. There's then a couple of changes that essentially allow cover and fortifications to receive more damage, which in turn allows players behind them to receive less damage for a longer amount of time. And then if a player revives someone during a reload, the reload will now be cancelled rather than completing during the revive. Away from this section, we then have some changes to scope glint. So listen up, you snipers. The medium range scope will now have a smaller and less intense glint than the high powered scope. As far as I'm aware, this only applies to bolt action rifles, but please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below. In addition to this, you will now be able to see scope glint from a little further away, and the glint of the medium scope now falls off over longer distances. Next up, a couple of changes to damage. Take a breath, all you Gewehr 43 enthusiasts, because the Gewehr 43 and the Selbstlader 1916 now have a reduced minimum damage, which stands at 33.5 rather than 35. This won't be noticeable all that often, but it does alter the overall lethality of the weapons in some instances, such as what the headshot multiplier can do and picking off weak enemies. And the other damage alteration comes in the form of a Mark 6 revolver buff, which surprises me. It now has a higher minimum damage and can kill at further ranges more reliably. Next up, we have some changes to handling, and this is almost all about SMGs, although not entirely. DICE want SMGs to be more viable at mid-range, and thus they've reduced SMG recoil and increased their accuracy. They've also improved SMG sustained fire whilst hip firing. We'll have to wait and see how this all pans out, but it could potentially make quite a big difference to the medic class. We then have an increase to the M1A1's vertical recoil from 0.55 to 0.6, so that won't be quite as much of a laser beam anymore. Plus, for all weapons, a nerf to vertical recoil reduction when crouching or prone. Also, these reductions no longer stack with recoil reduction from bipods. This will affect MMGs when prone the most, but will also obviously impact LMGs and such like. There's then a load of little map changes that don't warrant being mentioned, aside from a fix for controller vibration when playing grand operations. Yes, that's finally being fixed. We then have audio cues, and the only one I'm going to mention is a big one: footsteps. They'll now be louder and could be more so affected by the material that you're walking on. This is phenomenal news for me and so many other players that like to know what's going on around them. Onwards, game stability wise, we have multiple crash fixes and general stability improvements. And finally, for PC players, the density of the fields on a RAS has been increased to not give a visual advantage to those players playing on low spec PCs. And that is my breakdown of the January update patch. I hope some of that makes you excited. Let me know in the comments what you're most excited for. Mine will probably be improved footstep audio, new weapons, and trying out the Squad Conquest mode. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and join my Discord server in the description and my pinned comment. Here's the Board of Awesome for the epic people who support the channel on Patreon. They're all absolute heroes, and I love them all deeply and often. If you want to join them on the Board of Awesome, the link to the Patreon page is in the description and my pinned comment. And with that all said, I'm GetGoodGuy, and I'll see you next time. Laters.